with the people, networks, and organizations that are going to help you shape your economic success. So in today's webinar, as I've mentioned, we're focusing on the housing market in Canada. We're going to go through a number of things, and I'll just quickly walk you through the agenda today. We're going to get started by talking about an overview of the housing market here in Canada, and we're going to really focus in on rental prices in Canada. So many of you want to know how much it's going to cost for you to rent in Canada. We're going to talk about what you can be doing to prepare for the search before and after you arrive. We will address some of the challenges that you're going to face as a newcomer. And then we are going to talk about some of the tools and resources that we have prepared at Prepare for Canada to help you in your search. Importantly, I'm going to spend a lot of time at the end of the webinar answering your questions. So please feel free to submit your questions, and we'll try as best as possible to answer as many as we can. So let's start off by addressing, a reality that there is a housing crisis here in Canada, and it is impacting Canadian-born and newcomers alike. And for newcomers particularly, you're faced with some additional challenges versus Canadian-born, because if you're looking to rent, as an example, you're going to be arriving in the marketplace without necessarily credit history or without a job offer. So that puts you in an even more demanding, tougher situation than Canadian-born. So it's really important that you understand that there is a housing crisis here in Canada, and it is going to impact you as a newcomer, and you've got to be prepared, as best prepared as possible, to be able to, when you land, get into that housing market search so that you achieve the outcome that you want as quickly as possible, so you can continue on with your job search and get on with your new life here in Canada. It's important when you're educating yourself about the housing market here in Canada that you think both in the long term what your housing goals may be, and in the short term what you require. In the long term, many newcomers, about 65 to 70% of newcomers, intend to own their own home in Canada within 3 to 5 years. So while that may seem to be off in the distance, it is really important that you understand home buying prices here in Canada while you are still in your country of origin. And I'll explain a little bit more about this and why it's important to understand what the home buying prices look like, even while you're in your country of origin, so that you can avoid some pitfalls that some newcomers are finding themselves in right now. So there's some long-term implications for understanding the housing market. It's important that you understand home buying prices as well as you understand rental prices here in Canada. 90% of you are going to rent when you first arrive here in Canada. But it's really important that you also understand what the rental market looks like so that you can manage financial considerations and avoid unnecessary emotional stress. So getting a handle on the housing market before you arrive, both the long-term home buying market and the short-term rental market, can help you in financial management and mental health management. Really, really important. Let me explain what I mean by that. And why, it's important to understand home buying prices. And as I mentioned, many of you think, well, I'm not going to be worried about buying a home till 3, 5, 7 years after I arrive in Canada. So I'm not going to, stress myself with understanding home buying prices right now. What we found is that nearly 40% of newcomers who've arrived in Canada within the last 10 years are now contemplating a secondary move from one province to another. And the reason that they're contemplating that secondary move is they've discovered that home buying prices, which now they're ready to buy, they're discovering that the home buying prices in the cities that they've landed in are really astronomically high, and the home buying prices are keeping them out of entering into the home buying market. So they are now considering secondary moves. Almost 40% of newcomers are considering a secondary move to be able to get into the home buying market. A secondary move means that now all of a sudden you have to contemplate rooting your children out of school, uprooting yourself and taking your kids out of school. It may mean you have to quit your job to find a new job in a new city. There are costs associated with that secondary move. So a lot of people, well, they'd like to get into a secondary market in order to get into a more affordable home buying market. They feel like they're torn between uprooting themselves for that choice of getting into the home buying market, or staying put and not uprooting themselves, but not getting into the home buying market. So where you land then is going to be critically important to avoid having to do that secondary move. Many people who are looking at that secondary move have chosen to land in some of the bigger gateway cities like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, the biggest cities where the home buying prices are the most expensive. People landed in these cities because they've heard of these cities. They thought the job market prospects were greater in those cities. They landed there, and now they've decided it might be way too expensive for them to enter into the home buying market, and now they're considering those secondary moves. If you contemplate and educate yourself now on landing destinations outside of these gateway cities, you may choose to land in a smaller city like Regina or Winnipeg or Edmonton or Fredericton. Smaller cities that you hadn't contemplated, but then realize that not only are there good labor market opportunities there, the housing prices are much more affordable, and you can avoid making that secondary move. So it's really, really important when you're thinking about your landing destination that you take into account what the local labor market looks like, what the local housing market looks like, and what community support you can expect to see in any given city. The fact that you're here and you're here through working with SOPA means that you've already started making some smart choices about your immigration journey. So work with your client counselor to make sure that you're matching your labor skills with local labor markets. Get a better understanding of what support you can expect to see once you've arrived, which SOPA helps you do. You're doing all of the right things, but it's really important that you get a handle on home buying prices if that is your long-term goal to get into the home buying market. Make sure you land in a city where your income is going to be able to provide you with the opportunity to buy the home that you want that meets your family's needs. That's why it's so important, while you're still in your home country, to be understanding of the home buying price market here in the Canadian marketplace. One other thing, we're talking about home buying. I'll just mention one other thing, and then we'll get into the immediate requirements that you're going to have around, most likely the immediate requirements you're going to have around renting. Less than 10% of newcomers, intend to buy a place immediately upon arrival. And I would just caution you that, that's going to be one of the biggest financial decisions that you ever make, home buying, in all likelihood. It's a huge financial decision, and we always caution people not to rush into that decision around home buying for a number of reasons. You may buy a home and then end up getting a job that's 2 hours away from your place. So now all of a sudden you've built in a 4-hour travel commute every day of your working life into your life. That may just be too much time. In Canada, our schooling system is developed around the idea of catchment areas. If you want to send your child to a specific school, if you've been doing that research, you may be required to be within a certain catchment area. Now, if you purchased a house outside of that geographic catchment area, you may not be allowed to send your kid to send your child to that school. So there's those considerations. You may end up buying in a neighborhood that you actually find out you didn't like. So we always caution people not to rush into buying a place without sort of getting to know the familiarity with the neighborhood and the environment. So that's all I'm going to say about rushing into the decision around home buying. But it is important that you understand what home buying prices look like before you arrive in Canada, if home buying is going to be on your long-term financial planning map. Let's now get into rental prices and why it's so critically important that you understand rental prices. Everyone, asks us the question, hey, how much is it going to be for me to rent a one-bedroom place in Calgary? How much is it going to be for me to rent a two-bedroom place in Brampton? Rental prices across the country vary. They vary by part of the country. As I mentioned, there are tight vacancy rates in the big gateway cities like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. Those tight vacancy rates are driving up prices. There are places that have more reasonable vacancy rates and prices are more in line. A good rule of thumb to consider is, vacancy rates should be in the neighborhood of 3%. At the 3% mark, that's when supply and demand is roughly in balance and prices are going to be fair. When vacancy rates start falling below 3%, it means that there's really tight demand and landlords have the balance of power. In cities like Toronto and Vancouver, vacancy rates are less than 1.5%. So prices are skyrocketing. So you need to look at what the vacancy rates look like in different cities across the country. That's a good indicator of what prices are going to look like. Also, prices are influenced by the type of the neighborhood that you want to live in. If you want to live right downtown Toronto, which is a completely walkable environment, you're close to entertainment and nightlife, you're close to great transportation systems and schooling systems, job opportunities. It's going to be more expensive than if you live in the outskirts of Toronto. And that's not unlike any other city or any other country around the world. If you're in India, as an example, and you're in Mumbai, there are going to be more desirable areas than other areas of the city. But neighborhood influences the housing rental prices. And lastly, type of housing influences the rental price. Let me just talk about type of housing for one moment. And on my screen, you can see that there are 8 different types of housing. Let me just say, it's really important that you understand what your housing needs are. If you're traveling on your own, you have a lot more flexibility. You can share accommodation. You may be able to find a room in a house. You can find a bachelor apartment. However, if you're traveling with yourself, your spouse, 3-4 children, it may be that you're having to look at a semi-detached or a single-family detached, or maybe a 3-bedroom apartment or a 3-bedroom condo. All of a sudden, your needs go up and prices go up accordingly. So understand what your housing needs are, not only for yourself, but for the people that you're traveling with. Having said all of that, most people that arrive, about 65% of the audience that we deal with, arrive thinking they want either an apartment or rent out a condo. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about, what the distinctions are between apartments and condos, and ultimately what this means for you as a newcomer. Here in Canada, there's been a suppression of building apartment buildings. There was a huge flurry in the late 60s, 70s, building big apartment buildings. And through the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, that huge buildings of apartment buildings has kind of gone down a bit. But apartment buildings are generally big buildings and that are owned by a corporation, and in all likelihood, they own a number of buildings. They're older buildings, they're much bigger, bigger units, but they don't come with sort of the amenities that some of the newer apartment buildings have or some of the condo buildings have. So what that means is that they can be a little bit more affordable than a unit in a condo building. Let's talk about condos. Condos are buildings that are built by a developer, and then the individual units are sold off. In these buildings, because they're newer buildings, and oftentimes the condos are much smaller than a one-bedroom condo is much smaller than a one-bedroom in an apartment building that was an older built building. But in these condo buildings, individual owners own the units, and they can, with caveats, those individual owners can rent out that unit to people. These buildings, condo buildings, are much newer. They come with probably a lot more amenities, pool, gym room, concierge, 24-hour security. And because of those incremental services, features, they can be more expensive than their counterpart, one bedroom in an apartment building. The other thing, finding condos versus apartments, you're going to have to look for them a little bit differently. Apartments generally are advertised. You can find them on sites, whereas in many instances, condos are managed through real estate agents who represent the owner. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can use real estate agents to help you find the right rental property for you. But whether you're looking for an apartment, you'll be dealing with the supervisor of the building or the front end registration office. And where you're dealing with a condo owner, you may be dealing directly with the condo owner or be negotiating through a real estate agent with that condo owner. So when you're dealing one-on-one rather than through a corporation, you may have a little bit more room for and more flexibility for negotiating. But I'm not going to misrepresent that there's going to be opportunity to negotiate on price, because there are very tight vacancy rates, and so no one is giving up on pricing right now. So let me recap to this point here. When we started to talk about rental prices are influenced by what part of the country that you're going to live in, the city in what part of the country, what part of that city, the neighborhood, and what type of housing that you're going to be looking for. Now, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but I'm going to give you a quick example. In the chart on the left-hand side, we give you a map of Canada, and in the middle of Canada is the province of Ontario. In the chart on the right-hand side, we focus in on Lake Ontario. Here, Toronto is on the north shore of Lake Ontario. An hour away is the city of Hamilton. And just looking at that map, then now I want to put rental prices in context. A one-bedroom apartment in Toronto is on average going for about $2,500, where a one-bedroom in Hamilton, an hour down the road, is going for about $1,750. So there is a difference of about $750 a month. Over the course of 12 months, that's almost a $10,000 difference. So if you can find a good paying job in Hamilton and, and you get a one bedroom place, you can be saving $10,000, which again, if home ownership is a goal of yours over the long term, $10,000 is a savings towards a down payment. So it's really, I come back to the point, it's really important that you understand not only home buying prices over the long term in the city in which you intend to land, but also rental prices in the short term. And getting into a less expensive city can actually help you to achieve your goals in the short term, save money for the long-term goal of home buying. So I always encourage people to think beyond the gateway cities of Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Now let's bring it back as well to the immediate requirement. Everyone wants to know, how much is a two-bedroom place in Calgary going to be? How much is a one-bedroom place in Moncton going to be? Wherever you choose to land, please make sure that you understand what that rental pricing looks like for your needs. Because if you don't understand what realistic rental pricing looks like, you can expose yourself to some financial risk and some financial stress. If you don't understand how long it's going to take you to find that first rental place, it's also going to expose yourself to financial risk and expose yourself to mental stress. Let me give you two examples of what I mean here. One example is a woman who arrived in Toronto and contacted me. She had budgeted for $1,200 for a one-bedroom place here in Toronto. At the time that she arrived, one-bedroom places in Toronto were actually going for nearly $2,700. So she was off in her budgeting by $1,500 a month. If all of a sudden, she's now had to, commit to this new higher price because she was intent on getting that one bedroom place, she would have been off by $1,500 a month. That means in 9 months, she was off of her budget by nearly $9,000. In 6 months, she was off her budget by nearly $9,000. If you're arriving on your own and you've got the minimum proof of requirements, which is, I think, for a minimum single person, $20,000, being off by that much can really expose you to a lot of financial stress and mental stress. So it's really important that you get a good handle on how much it's going to realistically cost you in the city in which you intend to land, with the type of rental housing that you need for your personal needs. If you don't understand that and misallocate and wrongly budget, you're going to expose yourself to financial stress. This woman, unfortunately, was really stressed out by the situation that she found herself in, and it's avoidable just by doing some of your research. I'll also give you another example of why it's important to understand rental prices and understand how long it's going to take to find that first rental property, so that you can avoid some problems that other people have run into. Talking about how long it's going to take you to rent that place. Right now, it's taking Canadian-born first-time renters almost 8 weeks to find that first rental property. Newcomers are arriving, and over 50% of newcomers who are arriving believe that they are going to be able to get into their first rental place within 4 weeks of arriving. Well, if it's taking 8 weeks for Canadian born to find that first property, and you're arriving without credit history or a job offer, in all likelihood, it's going to take you 8 weeks as well to find that first rental place. So you should budget accordingly for that short-term rental period to make sure you've got at least 2 months covered in that short-term rental environment. If you don't, you can expose yourself to some financial risk. Let me give you an example of what I mean there. There was a fellow who arrived in Calgary who gave me a call, who had arrived with his wife and 2 children. He had rented an Airbnb for 10 days. $300 was a property that was costing him $300 a night. 10 days is $3,000. He thought he was going to be able to find a place in Calgary within that first 10-day period. He was unable to. He called me. He was 9 days in, and he ended up having to move out of the Airbnb, find a new Airbnb, and he booked it for another 20 days at about the same price, $300. There was a $6,000 spent. So in the first month, he spent $9,000 on a short-term accommodation that he had not budgeted for. So please, it's really important that you budget appropriately for the search time that it's going to take you, and that you budget appropriately for what it's really going to cost you when you find that first permanent rental place. If you're not contemplate taking into account how long it's going to take you and budget accordingly, and you're not taking into account realistically how much it's going to cost you on a monthly basis, you're going to expose yourself to financial risk and emotional stress. So that's really, some really important reasons as to why you need to have a plan for your search when both before and after you arrive. To develop this plan, I'm going to show you in our rentals for newcomers site a guide that you can use to start developing your own customized action plan. So you need to just start developing your plan. Now, there are many people who also ask me this question: can I get a place to rent before I've arrived in Canada? The answer is possibly, but in all reality, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to do that. And let's bring this back to, there's a very, very low vacancy rate here in Canada. That means that it is a landlord's market. They can pick and choose who they want in their places. Now, if someone is here in Canada, they've got a job offer, they're working already, they've got Canadian born credit history, that landlord is going to, give that unit to that person. They're not going to keep a unit sitting empty for 2 or 3 months while you're, on your journey to come to the country. So it's very unlikely that, you're going to be able to find a place before you arrive. In 3 months, 4 months, 5 months out. 2 weeks out, you can start having this correspondent, and, that time period, things may change a little bit. But we also say, if you're fully intent on trying to find that place to rent before you've arrived in Canada, it is critical to be able to identify and avoid scams, because, and I don't want to scare you, but newcomers can be targets for unscrupulous online fraudsters. So you need to really be able to identify and avoid scams. And we've got some great articles on how you can do that in our Rentals for Newcomers site, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So part of your planning needs to be, have a plan, be able to identify scams. One other thing that we suggest is you should consider opening up your bank account before you've arrived here in Canada. There are a couple of reasons for this. One, it makes it easier to cross the border, or proof of funds, but also if you're starting to talk to landlords 2 weeks out before you've arrived in Canada and you've got a Canadian bank account that you can show them proof of funds, it may make them more amenable to listening to what you have to say. So I'd recommend that. Once you've arrived in Canada, you need to start being able to execute your action plan. And I really want to stress why having a plan is important. If you arrive in Canada and now all of a sudden you're starting to do your research, what documents do you need? What is it that landlords want to see? What is tenants insurance? If you start doing your research after you've arrived, it's going to take you time. And the more time you take means either you're spending, if you're staying with friends and relatives, you're spending more time with them. If you're staying at an Airbnb or short-term rental, you're spending more money there. And the more time you spend on your home search means the less time you have to spend on your job search. So it's not having a plan before you arrive, not being able to execute immediately upon arrival is costing you time and money. The other things you need to understand after you've arrived is how to sell yourself as a prospective tenant. I'll talk more about tools that we have for you to do that. It's really important. Think about your housing search almost like a job search. You're selling yourself. So you need to be able to convince prospective landlords that you're a viable tenant. And it's really important that you understand renter's insurance, tenant's insurance. Landlords expect you to have this. Now, I know that tenants insurance in many countries around the world is not a big prerequisite, but here in Canada, landlords expect tenants to have tenants insurance. So if you don't have an understanding of what tenants insurance is, and you are in conversation with a prospective landlord, and he comes to the conclusion that you're not likely to have tenants insurance, he's going to discount you as a prospective tenant. So understanding tenants insurance is critically important, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I also now want to turn to some of the challenges that you're going to face when you arrive here in Canada. Most of you understand that credit is really important for landlords, and not having a credit history can be a bit of a challenge. So there are ways to get around the absence of credit history here in Canada. You can ask for someone to co-sign your rental agreement. There's one way. So let's say you arrive in Canada and you've got family or friends here that know you. They know that you're not a financial risk. They'd be more than happy to sign the agreement or your rental agreement with you. And what that means is they're taking on the responsibility of paying your rent should you be unable to pay your rent. So you have an uncle here, and he is going to sign and say he's going to, co-sign your rental agreement. If you're unable to pay, your uncle is going to pay for you. Now, this is one way to get around not having credit history, having someone co-sign. Now, obviously, if you get someone to co-sign, they're probably going to be someone who you know well, they trust you, and they believe that you are not going to renounce your financial obligations. So getting a co-signer, one way to do this. Getting a lease guarantee. There are companies that provide lease guarantees. It's almost like insurance. Like if you're unable to pay your rent, they'll pay your rent for you. Now, let's be clear. This is not free money. Like you can just not pay your rent and someone else is going to pay your rent for you. They will pay the rent, but they're going to come after you for that money with interest charges. So, and if you don't pay them, it is going to follow through on your credit history here in Canada. And for most of you as newcomers, all of you want to buy that for that long term. You want to buy a house, you may want to buy a car, whatever it is. If you've got bad credit history, it's going to really diminish your chances of achieving the long-term goals that you have here in Canada. So absconding on those payments is a real risk. So is a lease guarantee an opportunity? Absolutely. But you just have to understand that it is not free money. And lastly, you can offer up a security deposit. Now, landlords legally cannot ask for a security deposit. Here in Ontario, as an example, you're required to put your first and last month's rent down. But you can suggest to a landlord that you're prepared to offer 6 months additional as a security deposit. That means, their next 6 months is covered. Landlords will accept this security deposit. So that's another way in which you can get around not having credit history here in Canada. Many people ask, well, can I use my credit history from my current country? At this point in time, your credit history from your current country has no bearing in the minds of prospective landlords, unfortunately. So that's kind of where we stand with credit history. The other big question that we get from people is, what happens if I enter into a lease and then I have to break it? Now, a first permanent rental agreement, if you're signing for the first time with a landlord, in the large majority of rental agreements are 1-year terms. So if you sign a rental agreement, in all likelihood, you're going to be entering a 1-year term. Now, if you sign that agreement and then you end up getting a job 2 hours away from where you rent, you go back to your landlord saying, hey, I've got to move because this is just too far away from my job. You might find a landlord who says, that's okay, I understand. And they'll, for a certain price, damage fee, whatever, they'll allow you to break the lease. Some landlords may say, no, you've signed a lease, you're obligated to fulfill the lease. So you may have to find someone to sublease your place. That means that you lease out the place to someone else, they pay you, you pay the landlord. If they don't pay you, you're still obligated to pay the landlord. So, you're exposing yourself to some risk there if you don't know who you're subleasing to. Or you might decide, well, I'm just going to break the lease and move out. Well, the lease is a legal agreement. So the landlord can come after you. And again, this could impact your credit history, which you don't want to do. So, if you're not certain and you don't feel confident in entering into that first year, 1-year agreement, find a short-term rental property. Those do exist. You're going to pay a premium for those properties, but stay there until you've found and you feel secure enough that you know where you want to live, so that you're not entering into a situation where you're now in a 1-year lease and you've got to break it. So those are some of the biggest challenges. The other big challenge, of course, is the amount of time it's going to take. Everyone asked that question. I kind of touched on it earlier. You should budget for 8 to 10 weeks. If you find a place in a period shorter than that, fantastic. But budget for 8 to 12 weeks, budget accordingly so that you give yourself enough time and you budget it accordingly so you're not running into financial situations. Now let's turn to, some practical tools that you can use to start on your search. Here at Prepare for Canada, we have created 3 different solutions that you can use. Rentals for newcomers, rent using a real estate agent, and home sharing. And I'm going to now just change my screen here, and I'm going to go to our Prepare for Canada site. This is prepareforcanada.ca. And maybe, Alla, you can put up in the chat the link to our site, prepareforcanada.com. So in Prepare for Canada, if you scroll down our homepage, you'll see our 3 solutions: rentals for newcomers, home sharing, and rent using a real estate agent. Let me talk briefly about each of these properties. Rentals for newcomers is a search site. Many of you know what search sites look like. But what we've tried to do here is only work with landlords who understand who our target audience is. It's newcomers, and they value newcomers as tenants. So we've tried to weed out all of the people who don't want to rent to newcomers, so that you're only talking to landlords who know that you're, in all likelihood, you're going to be a newcomer. They understand that you may not have that job offer or credit history, and they're still, they're prepared to work with you. So it's really designed to reduce a lot of headache, heartache, and expense out of your search. So Rentals for Newcomers is a self-guided search site. Let me go into it a little bit more, and then I'll come back to the other 2 properties. If you click on this Get Started here, it will take you to another landing page where we explain in greater detail what Rentals for Newcomers is all about. And if you are you're a renter, click on I am a renter, and it is going to bring you to the Rentals for Newcomers site, or you can go directly to rentalsfornewcomers.com. It is a search site. And I'm going to briefly talk about the key features and benefits. I'll come back in a moment to how to use the search function. But importantly, it's filled with great information. I'm going to start off with the newcomer guide. As I mentioned earlier, it's important that you have a action plan. This newcomer guide basically lays out in great detail all of the things you need to be thinking about as you're customizing an action plan to start researching the rental market here in Canada, and to start dealing with prospective landlords, I mean. So make sure that you read our newcomer guide. Additionally, we populate our news section with an update on a weekly basis on, what the rental market looks like, each week, and highlighting different cities across the country. So it's a great tool to start doing your research. And importantly, in our blog section, this is filled with a lot of evergreen information, like what are some of the best neighborhoods to live in different cities across the country. I've talked to you as well about how to avoid scams. We update this article on a regular basis to make sure that we are keeping you abreast of the scams as they become apparent to us and noticeable to us. We update you on what scams are going on, how to identify them, how to avoid them. So it's filled with the site itself is filled with great information that you can use. But importantly, it's a search tool. So let's say you want to live in Edmonton. You type in Edmonton, and what will come up is all of the listings, from our partners that we're working with in Edmonton. Really, if you scroll down to the bottom of the listings, the first page of the listings, it will give you rent trends in Edmonton. So you can get a more accurate sense of what rental pricing looks like in different cities across the country through this. As I mentioned, it's critically important that you have that good understanding of rental prices. So you can find out rental prices. Now, let's say you come across a listing that you really, really like, right? You can start searching and do some more research about this site. And what's great about the site is it will also give you information around, the proximity to, schools, to restaurants, to shopping, to hospitals. So it's a good tool to sort of get a sense of the neighborhood. And let's say you want to submit a listing. This is where, I really want to stress this. If you're 3 months out and you fill out a submission, in all likelihood, you're not going to get a response for the reasons that I've talked about earlier. The landlord is going to basically try and get that place rented to someone who's here. However, if you are 3 months out, 2 months out, and you send in an inquiry and you say, I'm landing as a permanent resident, I'm landing on this date, there's myself, my spouse, 2 children, I've got a guarantor lined up, you give them greater details, they may, identify you as a good prospective tenant. So it's really important that you sell yourself here, not only in our rentals for newcomers messaging section, but whatever site that you're using. I encourage you to sell yourself properly as a prospective tenant. You're up against some big competition in a very tight vacancy rate market. So you need to sell yourself. We, in fact, have a tool, an ebook, downloadable ebook, how to sell yourself as a prospective tenant. Ala, if you could put up that link to that in the chat section, that would be great. I'd encourage all of you to download this, get a sense of what it is you need to be talking to landlords about, how you can sell yourself. We see so many people submitting inquiries with this message section blank or filled with just gibberish. And, if you're filling this out with blank statements or gibberish, you're not going to get a response. It's not going to be helpful to you. So this is how you can use rentals for newcomers. Now let's go back to our Prepare for Canada site, and let's talk about the other options. Now, home sharing, we've worked with a home sharing property technology company called Sparrow. And what they have designed is an artificial intelligence matching tool where we match you with a homeowner who's prepared to share their home with you. Home sharing means you've got your own room in a house where there's some shared space, shared kitchen, shared dining room, shared living room. You may share a bathroom or you may have your own bathroom. It depends on the household size. But this is a great option if you're coming on your own. It's a fantastic option for finding really affordable pricing. It's much less expensive to get into a home sharing environment than it is to rent a 1-bedroom place on your own. So, and you can rent a place for a minimum of 2 months. You can't rent any less than that. But there are many people that I've talked to who have said, I'm arriving with my family, but I'm going to show up. I'm going to rent a place through home sharing for myself for 2 months, 3 months, and I am then going to take that time to find the right housing requirements that meet our family's needs. So even if you're traveling with a family, you may want to come on your own, use home sharing as a short-term solution while you search for your place. So if you're here, Rooms for Newcomers, click on I am a renter, and it will take you to a registration page where you can start the process of getting aligned with a prospective landlord. And lastly, we have rent using a real estate agent. Now, this is for people who are landing in Ontario, and you have to have landed in Ontario to use this. But if you're landing in Ontario or landed in Ontario, this is for you. We match you with real estate agents who are prepared to help you find that first rental property. Now, remember when I was talking about condos, a lot of condos are managed through real estate agents. So real estate agents have a good in with condo owners who are looking to rent out their place. A real estate agent can best represent you. They know how to negotiate on your behalf. It is a great tool to use, and it is free. Now, I will say this. When you go, if you are looking to use a real estate agent and you have to register, which you'll have to do, it's going to ask you a series of questions. So, and, they're going to ask you, what are you looking for? Now, if you put in there that you are looking to rent a 2-bedroom place in Brampton for $800, or like that woman who showed up saying, I'm looking to find a $1,200 1-bedroom place in downtown Toronto, they're going to say you have absolutely no idea around what it is that you're looking for. You have no realistic expectation. I'm not prepared to work with you because I'm going to spend a lot of time and I'm not going to be able to meet your needs because that property simply doesn't exist. So when you're filling out that questionnaire, you have to have some reasonable semblance of understanding of what the real estate market is. Otherwise, real estate agents are not going to view you as a candidate that's worth working with. I'm going to remind everyone that all of these services are free of charge. You do not spend a cent to participate, to register and engage with any of these options. So those are 3 solutions that we have right now that can help you in your home search. With that being said, I am going to turn it over to answering questions. We've gone on a little bit longer than I had hoped, but Annika, I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Thank you so much, David. That was very, very insightful. And I will just check the chat. I'll give everybody a moment to think. If you, anybody here in the meeting here, have a question, please type it in the chat, and I will read it to David. Otherwise, Ala has posted all the links that David was talking about in his presentation, about the housing options, how to sell yourself as a tenant, the rental application guide. She posted all of those in the chat. Otherwise, I would suggest everybody to definitely check out. You can probably just Google it as well and make yourself onto the website. And if you still have questions and you're not sure about, you can reach out to your employment counselor and double check with your SOPA team as well. Okay, any questions? I don't think we have any. You were very detailed.
Well, that's great. And listen, if there are questions, Annika, later you can forward them on to me. People can register at Prepare for Canada. I'd encourage for those of you who are listening in, I'd encourage you to register with Prepare for Canada, because once you do, you'll be included in our housing newsletter, which we put out on a monthly basis, which gives you some great information on the ever-changing housing market here in the Canadian marketplace. So it's really worthwhile information, and it's helpful information. And let me bring it back to why understanding the housing market here in Canada is so critically important. You can't look at landing in Canada sort of in isolation, only be thinking of it in terms of your job needs. You need to be thinking of it in terms of your job needs, your housing needs, and settlement support services that you can expect. And as I said at the beginning, you're already indicating that you've got some understanding of that because you're working with SOPA. So 2 thumbs up there. Congratulations to all of you. We'd be happy to help you in your housing search, so register with us.
Okay. So David, I have one, or it's probably also for Ala. Farha is saying the rental application guide link doesn't open here. I have tried them and they were opening for me. One thing you can try is to copy them and try a different browser. It might just be that the browser that you're using right now is not opening it. maybe take a moment while you're still here, if you want to keep it, copy them onto like a notepad or something on your desktop and try it with a different browser. Otherwise, I guess they can also find it on your website, right? If they just Google Prepare for Canada.
Yeah. If you go to our rentals for newcomers site, you'll be able to find it there, and I'd encourage you to download it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then we have another comment here. No questions. Great presentation. Would be good to share it. So we did record this, and I will talk with our communications team how we can get it out. Maybe there is a way to have it on our SOPA YouTube channel. So please stay put. If you're not following us, SOPA on YouTube, please do so. And we usually post videos and things as well there.
Fantastic.
Okay. Thank you so much, David, for this great presentation. And thank you, Alla, for also being here as a support and putting the things in the chat. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I hope you enjoyed this and it was beneficial. And we have 1 more hour left in the job fair. If you haven't been to any employer booths, please hop in there. I do feel it has eased off in traffic, so you might have a better chance now to speak with some employers if you were waiting a little bit before that. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And thanks, David, again.
Thank you so much, Annika, and thank you all for attending. Thank you.